Kevin.
How you doing?
Good, pretty fucking good, man. Yeah, thank you. How you doing? What are you coming in with?
It's a short week, so those always feel weird coming in, and I'm just like looking at a short week with like what feels like not enough time and then also not enough to do. And I'm the kind of in my own therapy, I was just talking to my therapist last week. I've been thinking about this a lot. One of my first words was empty, which is a little heavy, and I would like hold up my bottle and I'd be like empty. But I've been thinking about it's like I can't do empty. So I want to fill things up. And so at work I do that a lot. I do that with like spaces with people. I'll fill it with words, I'll fill it with activity. If I've got nothing to do, I'll go on a run. So that I'm looking at only 3 days and some blank spaces. So I'm like, what am I gonna fill them with? And I looked at myself and was like, oh, there's that need to fill things. To be like, let's get it to your point last time we got, let's put another meeting on the calendar. Yeah, it's worthless for both of us, but let's get another meeting.
It's such good self-awareness. It reminds me of when we talk about you be on a call and they weren't aligned. You'd be towards the end of the call and you'd be like, don't do it, Kevin. Don't do it. Don't do it, Kevin. And you'd be like, how about we meet again, have next steps? And you'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, and you were spending a lot of time on a lot of different deals. And then when we started working with each other, you started to really prioritize deals, made more money, less time, less stress. Is that, tell me if that's relevant.
It totally is. I mean, and this is also where, to the last conversation we had, I think that whatever's going on in our wider life shows up in our work life, and the two can inform each other. And that is just because I've realized what I need to work on doesn't mean that the work is easy. uh it's not like I was like, oh good, so just like qualify bad deals out. Oh, just realize there's no next step and then drop it. There's no value, no alignment, just drop it. I have a tendency to want things to work. I have a tendency to want to like bring the connection, so I still deal with that. But it's about having a set of tools that helps one identify what's going on, so that once I notice that I'm starting to do that, like you mentioned, having that self-awareness, just saying, I don't need to do that. I'd rather be uncomfortable because my schedule has some openings. I'd rather be uncomfortable because my pipeline isn't as robust as I'd like it to be, and have that be an honest reflection, as opposed to being like, I must be really busy and a good boy because my schedule's full and my pipeline's full. Those are misaligned. And so again, that's why having a set of principles to put in place to remind oneself, oh, I don't need to do that thing that my brain and my empty heart like wants to push me towards.
Super good self-awareness and super honesty. And you started, when we started talking to each other, you were already a super rep. And then you became not just a super rep, but also a super leader, super manager. And it sounded like there was a better experience internally, regardless of the results. Is that accurate?
Yes. And I think this is where I'd say yes, better, and still on the path. And a lot of those principles that you and I worked on still stay as part of my program ongoing. Um, just both in terms of qualifying, is this a line? And again, this is where I skirt the line between, are we talking about deals or are we talking about life? Because again, I would rather spend, if I'm going to spend as many hours as I do working, I'd like it to be aligned with the path I'm on in life. And so I would say I spin my wheels less. I'm still working on spinning my wheels less. But that's where, when you realize that the work you're doing is ongoing, like I would like to be more effective with the limited amount of time that I have. And I want to be happier. I want to be more successful, make more money, rise in the ranks, whatever it is that the goals are. Like you said, like I was a good rep then. Well, before you showed up, I was leading the pack at the company that I was working at. And I primarily did that through working harder than everyone else. I think. I mean, because I wasn't smarter or more clever. I just got up a little earlier and I stayed a little longer and I made calls a little faster and with more passion and energy. And that's well and good. It's also a road to burning out or at the very least, missing opportunities because I was so focused on the ones in front of me that I wasn't open to the ones that I hadn't even countered yet.
So let's make this real. And we've kind of just dove in as we do. Can you think of a moment this week or last week when, this feeling potentially of empty, I want to fill emptiness, arose, and like, what can you go back to that and like, what was happening? What was the thought? Maybe the feelings, could you see it and did you stop it, or did you it kind of just took you over while you had the inner dialogue? Open up. Tell us, give us a glimpse of this in action.
In a work and sales environment, or do you mean just generally?
Yeah, first work.
So this is a good one because I will share that I am at the start of a new career transition, and I've shared this with you, but I'll share it in this space as well. So I spent 6 years at this last company going from like bottom rung SDR to AE, senior AE to a director of one vertical, and then, kind of kept working my way up. So every step, there was a new step for me to learn, and I moved up quickly. And I've taken this career transition into a new industry, a new style of sales. And there's a lot to learn and not a lot for me to do. And as a salesperson, this is one of those things where I'm in discovery of the industry, right? Like I'm in the discovery phase. I'm in the why anything, why now, why with Kevin. Because I'm not even at the point where I'm like a month in. And I cannot tell you how quickly I want to zoom towards the end. I want to close the deal and be ready to sell. And I'm not there. And I probably, in all honesty, I will not be independently selling for like at least a year. And my inclination is to be like, but I could do it faster. I could do it better. And I would fill up. And so like, I was telling you this right at the start. I don't know if we've started yet. Maybe we've started. I'm sure we've started. Maybe we can cut it in. I look at my schedule and I'm like trying to fill it up as opposed to what can I do today that's smart? Like, can I apply all these principles that I've been taught from so many different sales teachers and spiritual teachers and just life teachers? Like, how can I align myself to be focused and not frantic? And that's where I find myself in this last week looking at blank space on my calendar and then being like, okay, so what can I do? And I'm gonna fill it up. I'm gonna prospect here. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. As opposed to just, what I could do is block out my time, like preset a schedule so that I know exactly what I'm doing in each hour. So that I think those are as I move forward in my career, it's just I have these emotional reactions to the majority of my day. I'm an emotional person. A lot of salespeople are. A lot of the people that I worked both with and that worked on my team, a lot of it's about managing your emotions in a challenging job. We get told no most of the time. You'll lose 90% of the deals you start on average. I would say, if you look at like from first call, like at least 90%. And so it's managing your emotions through that. So again, like last week, I looked at my calendar and I was like, it's not full enough. And I started like doing this and that. And my manager was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, just chill out, learn slow. Like, you've got time. Like, there's nothing for you to do right now. And so those are things that like I always just look at, like, again, and we could also apply this to some deals as well. But I think those basic principles of like, how do you be a good AE and produce for the company while managing your emotions, which for me tend to put me in a place of I'm I want to run so hard at a brick wall that I might bounce off it instead of realizing like, hey, there's probably a way over, around, under. You don't always have to go through.
There's so much wisdom in that. When you're having this kind of inner dialogue, how connected, if at all, and if so, how, are you with just like the experience of Kevin as he's having that kind of, discussion about the brick wall and how fast he can get going, and then how much he's learned, what, that he doesn't have to go through. Like, what's that experience like?
Um, I think like most of us on our path, I would say in the moment alone, I don't do a quick job of reorienting myself. And that's also, look, here I am doing it again. I'm like, I'm not doing it fast enough. I'm wasting time spinning my wheels like a normal human. So I'll give myself a little grace and compassion and say, like, I'm on the path to wanting to notice that stuff faster. I don't do a very good job noticing it by myself. And that's why for millennia, like the way we learn is usually in partnership with a guide. Like I need other people guiding me on my path who just know more than I do because they've got more experience. So one of the things I've been doing a lot is ask, and lucky enough, like my company that I'm working for now, it's a hybrid scenario where I've got 2 days at home and I have 3 days in the office, and I'm sitting next to two people who are right ahead of me on the journey by about 9 months and about a year and a half. So I ask them all the time, and they're like, "Oh, we're also figuring this out," or "Oh, here's how I stopped making that problem." And in the same way, like that's where things that you taught me in the time that we got to work together. What was that, 4+ years ago, 4-ish years ago, I want to say,
I think about
2019.
3 years ago. I think no,
Yeah,
it was the beginning of COVID.
yeah, you're right. It was yeah, you're right. So that was like 3 years ago. And though, like, some of those things have stuck with me, and I've also met other people who've taught me other things. I'd met people before who taught me things, and what I carry with me, like these, again, like they're sales axioms, they're work axioms, they're life axioms of just how to approach challenging situations with less emotional grind. Those are the things that, when I'm lucky, I remember them. But usually what works best for me is asking someone, ask for some help or some reflection, because that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges when I was doing sales leadership. I was doing that remotely, and learning anything new when you don't have the ability to just say, hey, sit behind so and so, watch what they do, watch them click through Salesforce, watch them qualify an opportunity, listen to this sales call, don't say a thing, and then afterwards talk about what went well, what could have gone differently, what we're going to do next time. Those sorts of things, especially in the virtual environment, when you don't have that, people tend to get into an isolated place of confronting challenges and problems. And when you don't have a teacher to say, hey, I see how you're doing this, tell me why. So hey, I get, we talked about this last time we talked. I gave you this advice. You just share that you didn't follow it. Tell me why. There must have been a reason. Well, it would have been, they wouldn't have liked it if I told them this. It's like, yeah. And if they didn't like it, then it's probably not a good deal if you're telling them these things based on being honest with the principles of, what's worth both of our time, things like that. So again, I think it's where asking for guidance, asking for assistance, and running your process past someone who you respect and who understands the process you're trying to put in place. I think those are the things that help me, because I don't do it very well on my
own. I always appreciate your refreshing, seeing yourself clearly and sharing where you're at and having a desire to get further. Just a few moments ago, you caught yourself, right, trying to go fast, and you verbalized that. You're like, oh, here I am trying to fill things up and accelerate, and then you comforted yourself. You know, you reoriented to like, oh yeah, you know, here I am again. Okay, they're doing good. I want to do better. What was that experience for you as you did it in real time? Did you have sensations in your body? Did you have emotions? How did you know like you were going down a certain route and you chose a different one?
A really good question. I I think in language, and I noticed the words I was saying. I noticed the words I was saying, and I was like, yeah, and it wasn't. I was basically saying it wasn't enough. And I have an emotional reaction to if I'm not enough. You know, I think a lot of us do. I mean, yeah, talk about one of those first words. I was like, empty. This isn't enough. I've run out. This isn't, you know, I'm searching for value. When I notice myself doing that, I just know the pattern that I have, which is what I'm doing isn't enough. If I'm saying like I should be getting there faster, I should be closing this deal, I should have learned this by now. I'm never gonna make it to quota, like whatever those things are. Whatever it is that I say that's leading to that, like it could be something as like, oh, this is a really slow quarter. You know, really what I'm saying is I'm not going to get there fast enough. And I'm already I just know the pattern that again, this is me personally. Although I would say I see this in a lot of salespeople, which is the cyclical quarter pattern of what happens to you during those 3 months. Or if you're on an annual cycle, like what happens to you over those 12 months? Or if you're on a monthly cycle, what happens to you over those 30 days? Like watch your pattern, because I know what mine is. It's the second I start going like I'm not enough, I'll start being like, oh, what can I do? And some people do something else. They'll be like, they start seeing that they're not going to get there and they absolutely freeze. They stop communicating. Personally, I have gotten better at noticing the words that I use. Like in that example you brought up where I was saying, you know, I wanted to get there faster. Oh God, there I am doing it again. I want to get to the end. So me personally, like I will notice the words I use. But when I was working with other reps, like I would notice a lot of things. It's easy, it's hard to do with yourself, easy to do with other people. So reps, if you're out there and you're like, my manager's always getting on me about this, it's like, don't worry, your manager also has problems. We all do. It's just easy to see that stuff in other people. And when I was working with other reps, I would notice all the time these everybody want, and again, the metrics are important, activity is important. Hey, you're not making as many calls, you're not in enough deals, your deals aren't, all those things are also important. And the emotional tells also really matter, of people as they start to shut down, or as people as they start to make excuses, people as they start to replace, you know, inactivity with, you know, wild activity that isn't really focused on anything. Like I've seen SDRs where they'll be like, I'll just make like 100,000 calls and it doesn't matter if they don't pick up. My call number's up. It's like, that's not the goal. Like wild activity also isn't the answer. No activity also isn't the answer. And so for me, understanding that emotional quotient of, oh, I'm doing that thing again because I'm uncomfortable. It's okay. You do that all the time, Kevin. You do that all the time. And just like having that grace and that moment to say, let me not have, because we were talking about this when you were describing a story of stopping someone and you'd given, I can't remember what the advice was, but you had given some advice and you said, well, did you follow it? And they said, no. You said, well, tell me why. Let's break that down. Why didn't you? Well, because they wouldn't have liked it. They wouldn't have liked, I think it was about price. It was about, just give me the price. It's like, well, I gave them the price because they would have been upset with me if I didn't. And it's like, you know, let's talk about why that might have felt more comfortable in the moment, but ultimately will lead you to the more uncomfortable answer that probably they weren't interested. Probably you should disqualify it out. So, you know, again, the ability to self-regulate some of that, because I'm an emotional person and I have emotional reactions. Most salespeople do. Like I've noticed that I need to do that, because otherwise, it's, again, especially in the alone virtual world, working alone, like I will dig my own emotional grave and then I won't be as effective.
This is like a master class for managing emotional triggers and seeing emotional tells for reps and so rep managers. I'd like to kind of go back though. So you're a very heady guy in the sense that you're very smart and just really clear. And so for you, you said that your tell when you were doing it, just when we were talking, was the words you're using. So that to me, that's an amazing, beautiful hack, right? And then I saw you comfort yourself. Like I felt your heart open to yourself. And I had a feeling when I was witnessing that. And I'm just curious, once you become aware of the words and you came back to yourself, were you aware of any of the emotions or feelings in your body? And then how did it feel when you comforted yourself?
Yeah, and I am heady and I talk a lot. It's something I know about myself. And so it's been easy for me to notice in the words. And I talk about this with my therapist a lot, where there's this difference between like I will literally be in my head. Like the physical feeling would be like I'm up in my head, like I'm in my eyes, I'm thinking out of my mouth, and it's very physically in my head. And then I'll be like, like here, like it's like that. It's that what is it? It's 12 inches from your head to your heart, but it's a long way to drop. It's like there's just a sinking back into one's body and a level of comfort that I it's a physical feeling of not trying to convince myself or others with my words that I'm right. Um, I I notice this so much as well, like that difference between physically like feeling like I'm in my head, I'm like in my eyes, I'm in my hands trying to explain something, I'm in my mouth trying to like work fast. If I'm ever like losing a deal or feel threatened in a deal and someone say like, well, you better essentially for lack of a better word or being specific, kind of, you better explain yourself, your competitor's doing this, you better explain, your price is real expensive, better explain yourself. We're thinking of walking away and you're like, no, let me explain a bunch of stuff. um like that's all in the head. It's all like, in my objective behind which is I've got to convince them to do a different thing, as opposed to like just for like when, and again, to use a different scenario, when I'm comfortable in a deal and I know I'm going to win and I'm with the person on the other side and we're just talking about where their company needs to go and how my side can help. That those kinds of conversations, when you're really laughing with somebody and you're really planning and you're really engaged, it's a totally different in the body feeling of, oh cool, what are we going to do next? It's like the feeling of sitting on a couch relaxed with your friends when you're talking about the week to come or whatever it is, or the week that was, and you're just communicating as opposed to trying to convince people of stuff. And that difference, heady and long-winded way of saying, it's like there's this difference between very tight cerebral, I gotta explain it, gotta talk real fast, gotta think on my feet, versus like from the heart of just connecting with somebody. And in that case where they're saying, hey, maybe we got to walk away, maybe we got to make a different price, your competitor's doing this, like, okay, tell me about that. I don't have to convince you, tell me about it, you can walk away anytime.
Wow. So you are aware of the sensations in your body and the connectedness to emotions and the kind of resources that come when you're in that space. You just described it pretty clearly.
I think in this moment where we're focusing on it, yes, but I know that I personally have a lot of work to do of being able to tap into that in the moment. Because when I'm on, the equivalent of being on stage, I tend to go into performance mode, and I don't necessarily have that 360 awareness to go, oh, here's where that's happening again. I tend to just perform, and sometimes the performance is one way versus another. But I'm on the path. I'm getting towards having that be a little more instinctual, to just be able to drop back in.
It's fascinating. So like we're talking here, it's a podcast. You're performing in a way, and I saw you become aware of doing it, reacting to that thought of empty, not fast enough, not, and you dropped into your body. I saw it, and you went into compassion, and you got perspective, and then you just continued on super clear, with wisdom. And that's pretty phenomenal in the moment awareness. And you found it out by the words you were using, but then it became an integrated full Kevin experience.
Yeah. Thanks for noticing that. Feels good to be seen. I think at our best, we're all trying to do that. And I think it's pretty normal that our objectives coming into a call, to a meeting, to a podcast episode. I mean, luckily, like I don't have a huge agenda today other than talk to you, but I still want to be good. You know, I want to say smart things. I want to, you asked me like, hey, when did you find those challenges? And I started talking about those challenges and I immediately got sucked into them. And I think that for most salespeople, the desire to be good lives somewhere in there. There's not a lot of salespeople, at least who last very long in their career, that are like, I don't really give a shit. Like, whatever, that's not really a successful sales attitude. And so being able to be with that, that reality, it's like, I want to please. And I don't, there's a different level. I mean, we were talking about this previously. I shared this with any of the reps that I work with that won't think I'm a total crock for saying things this way, but there's a spiritual aspect, in my opinion, to sales where it is really easy to just put on this performance face and be a used, like the perspective of the salesperson is the used car salesperson just trying to make a buck. I will sell you any broken car for as high a price as I can convince you to do it. I'm here to screw you over. That persona that we all are so well aware of, when you tell someone, it's like, oh, what do you do? I'm in sales. And you see that person's face change a little bit. That's fine. There is a way to do this job that isn't that. And we all know that. We know when we've sold like that. We've been good, honest salespeople. And I think we all also know when we've been a little on the other side, when we've gone against the principles that we know are right, when we do stretch the truth a little bit or a lot. Like if you've ever done that and you can be honest about it, I know that I have. It's because my objective of getting the deal got in the way of my objective of getting it done. We've all lied in our lives, whatever the context is. And if you're listening to this thinking, I don't do that. It's like, all right, cool. Go do some shadow work. Like figure out what the dark side is. It's fine. Or don't, keep selling however you want to sell. But if you're the kind of person, if you're listening to this podcast and you're down with Walter, probably you want to figure out like who you are in this whole thing. Like I think that's where the juice is. Like in this career, like, can I do it and be honest in the face of, I also have this objective to get deals closed. It's how I get paid. It's how I feed my family. There's nothing wrong with that. And can I always work to never be dishonest first with myself and then with everyone around me? And can I do it in a way that's kind, compassionate, curious, caring? Like all those are hard things to do. And when you do them as a first principle, of a way, I know I'm kind of mixing our words here, but like the first thing I do is if I'm always honest, open, curious, caring, compassionate, and interested in helping someone out if I can, if it also helps me, that's fine. And it's where, again, I'll always be a salesperson, used car salesperson, or that persona. I try not to be. And I think that's where, as you mentioned, the word performance, like, boy, is it easy to put that mask on to protect yourself from what is a challenging and painful career sometimes.
Wow. Masterclass, man. What has your personal development, healing path, however you want to call it? I mean, one of the things that, when I work with high growth companies, one of the things that they experience is that the company's growing so fast, and like the demand on revenue grows, the expectations grow. All of a sudden you go from an individual contributor to like, hey, could you lead this team? That grows. You start to have like, VPs and then VP of Europe, and, then the CRO appears. And so there's these constant increases in demands. And typically companies will hire out for that. And then you hire someone that doesn't necessarily know how to do what you do well. And then you end up having to slow everything down to teach them. And then they come on. There's a certain amount of time before you know if they're right or successful or not. And so one of the things that I talk with companies about is, how do you invest in the individual so that they personally can grow as fast as the company, so that they can start to take on more responsibility, go from individual contributor to a leader. And maybe you still hire someone over them, but now they're much better and have a much better foundation in place that the leader can leverage, right? And so with that kind of frame, you've done a massive personal growth, and you've sought out tools and support. And as you've had a masterclass just now talking about the self-awareness of the sales process and all that, and also touched upon as a sales manager, what has really guided that personal development?
It's a really good question, and actually, it makes me want to ask you a question back. I don't want to derail and not answer your question. So,
you wouldn't be in sales if you didn't do that. And in fact, that's one of the things I always reinforce.
One of the things that you said that was really important. I want to answer your question, but I also want to put you on the spot. It makes me want to ask you the question, and we'll get back to it because I'll answer yours. But it makes me want to ask you the question of, I'd be interested to know when you're talking to leaders of companies that are saying, hey, we want you to come in here and supercharge growth. I feel like every company who needs that is also telling a story like, we're growing really, really fast. Like no company is like, we're dying out here. Everybody wants to be on this hyper growth trajectory. When you talk about like, but can the companies stand it? It's like, sometimes I feel like I've seen other companies who are like, we've just figured out how to make this boat float in the water, but guess what? We're going to strap some rockets to the back of it and try to go into outer space. And it's like, what is the emotional quotient of talking leaders through? Is your growth target aligned with your company's ability, and specifically the sales organization's ability to withstand that trajectory? Like, I'm so curious to just quickly hear you, and then I'll answer your question, to talk about like, how do you coach someone through what's possible from your experience?
Yeah. So one of the first principles is don't waste time in sales, from Steve Brown, right? It's like the first principle, don't waste time. And then all the coaching is around how do you not waste time, and if people are operating like, and the other part about not wasting time is like, you have to see reality as it is, right? And in sales, you have to be super optimistic and you have to, all this, but it's like, you need to break things down to the fundamental building blocks of truth, and then build back how you're actually going to make the number. And, there might be a number of unknowns. And in a startup, you're signing up to a number of unknowns, right? But for me, it's like, how do you continuously create this feedback loop of going back to reality, to seeing it as it is? And in that feedback loop is going to each rep, each sales manager, each sales leader, founder, investor, buyer, and find the places where the range of reality is limited for them. It could be beyond this point, they can't handle it, or it could be like, they can handle a lot, but like in this one place, it kind of dips significantly. Approaches zero, goes negative. And so what I always coach is, it's like, you need to really find the range of reality that's true, so you can really define what problems are you trying to solve and in what order that could possibly get you here, that could, figure out something that changes the dynamics of how you sell. It might be shifting your ICP. Maybe you don't know who your ICP is, and given the current people you're selling to, you're not going to hit your number. But if you can have this feedback loop and the points where you're like, oh shit, I'm going to try to be busy, fill my calendar, and keep moving with someone that's not in my ICP, instead of seeing the reality of that, spending time instead of inbounds that aren't aligned, start doing the hard work of outbounds, and starting to see clearly, risk saying things that are going to blow up that deal, but get faster and better at figuring out why they're actually more aligned. And then, getting, customer success, marketing, solution engineers all aligned with that new ICP. And then all of a sudden you can do it. So what I'm saying is, I always coach in, how do you figure out where you're at? How do you figure out where there's weak spots in terms of the emotional reactions to allowing you to see clearly? And how do you just create this like feedback loop that increasingly allows you to align to the reality of your forecast? And in that process, there's unknowns how you're actually going to make it there. But they're unknown. The thing that really is damaging is when there's unknown unknowns. Because now you're completely flying in the dark, right? And so, most companies, startups do what no one thought was possible, including some of the founders and such, and you take turns daring to dream. But if there isn't this continuous process of like putting on what I call a simple lens, first principles thinking to see yourself and the prospects clearly, so you can continuously be realigning. It's so funny. I had this whole image in my head, and I got too excited by it because this is such a good question. And let me just kind of get back into my body. I was too much in my mind, and then I lost it. But yeah, it's the not being honest with oneself of where you are, so that you can actually innovate and do what currently no one knows how to do, but they know they don't know how to do it, right? And so a lot of startups win. Yeah, what I was saying was, a lot of startups win when they shoot for the impossible. They have unreasonable demands on themselves and other people, but they create the space to see clearly and to readjust. And that's what you do. And if you're wrong, maybe then, you're a leader, you get fired, or you're a rep, you get fired, or your best reps will say, hey, we're flying in the dark, and I am a trained, fine-tuned instrument. Why would I work at a company that consistently is flying in the dark with insane targets? I either want to work at a company where there's no knowns and I can optimize my comp plan, or there's known unknowns and they have a methodology to accelerate the discovery process and to accelerate the realigning process. And that's the bigger pent-up demand. Because when things are knowns, everyone's trying to do it, right? But if you're like, no, I want to get on a rocket ship to the moon, and I want like total growth, strategically picking your known unknowns, and then being with teams that actually have a process to deal with that. That's how I deal with it. So when I come into companies, a lot of times it's like, show me your deals. I don't know if you remember this, but show me all your 80% deals, and that you have to win. And when we bring them through the first principles, the unit tests, right, the kind of roughly the 10 steps, each one has like exit criteria, and you can't skip steps to say you're out of steps. So you have a sponsor and you have the answer to the 3 W's, but you don't have a champion. You don't get credit for the sponsor until you get a champion, right? So they kind of stack. Again, I just got too excited. What was I saying?
You're stacking the deals when you're inspecting deals.
But before that,
I think ultimately the theme that I'm pulling is accurately seeing where you are. And when I hear that, and again, like I asked you also like a massive question. So I love, and this is where I love your excitement. It's one of these things that and to the question you asked me, which I'm going to butcher but I think it's perfect. It's like what you asked, like, what are some of the healing processes you've been through that have helped you move forward? Because what you're talking about, like seeing yourself accurately, can you be honest with what your goals are and where you are to those goals? I observe so often in the startup space, especially, but in so many companies or professional spaces, and especially in sales, this gap between the truth and the story that is not a gap that makes sense, and people don't usually want to talk about that. People, and it's usually in two extremes. People love to talk about how exceptional they are or how terrible they are, and usually neither one is really rooted in reality. But when it comes to like what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, so you've got this really huge number target, like you want to hit this goal, and that has both individual implications for the reps that have to help you get there, and for the demand gen team maybe that has to provide, you know, the number of leads or whatever it is. Like the whole revenue organization needs to be centered around how do we get to that number. And so often I feel like reps are put in this position to be told, you've got basically, you've got to perform because the team's got to get there. So different, again, the emotional weight that puts on reps individually, having been a rep myself and then having managed reps, it is hard to be honest with yourself about where you're at when it feels like I gotta just sprint up that hill. I don't know. I don't care how I gotta get up. I just gotta get up there, and not stop and say, okay, what's in my backpack? Am I trying to sprint up a hill with a backpack filled with rocks? Like, what are these rocks? Maybe I'm gonna need some of these rocks. I don't know. And that's where I think the ability, and this is where when you use it, like, what event? So again, in that process of can I not waste time, and in that be completely honest with who I am and where I am and what's going on. And I observed you do this a couple of times, like, ooh, I got excited. Where am I at? Where are we at? And someone could listen to that and go like, oh, they lost the thread. Or they could go, yeah, like, of course, in a conversation, we lose we're not, okay, where are we at? How can we get realigned? That is a perfect example of that process. I knew exactly where we were going until, we didn't quite make it. Where were we at? How can we go back to the start, the truth of what it is that we're trying to accomplish? Whether that's sell $1 million of whatever the software is or whatever, or again, to one of my guiding lights is I don't have time to spend 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week working if that time is not also being spent in parallel with being the kind of person I want to be. And that's most of my time awake. You know, like if I practice, and again, this is like we're practicing who we are at every moment we're in it. If I'm 50 hours a week practicing being a dishonest person who tells stories about how great my pipeline is, oh, my team, that we're absolutely gonna hit the number, when actually we aren't. Like, what are the odds that I'm going to go back to my family and start telling stories about only the positive side, never the negative side, never coming to, hey guys, I have a problem, I need some help, I need some support. And that's where that coming back to the healing side of things is part of it. Is I think and you see it on the company level where it's like, we're going to hit this number, we're going to LFG life, kind of like, we're the best, our competition's the worst, all this like tribal stuff, which is important for companies. I get it. Like, we have to be able to tell the story that we're great, we're going to get there, we've set an exceptional goal, we're going to grind harder. Like, that stuff's all important. And if we can't stop and say, like, is that just a protective armor to protect against the fact that we're scared we might not be able to get there? That's where, when you ask the question, the initial question was, what kind of healing work have you done to be able to be in the midst of that? Like, I'm a sober person who, like, had a lot of problems trying to cover for the fact that I was uncomfortable, that I was unhappy, that I was insecure, and I used drugs and alcohol to try to manage that. It didn't work. So I'm a person who's actively in recovery for a number of years, and that's a really important part of, like, again, it's just that, like, going back first step in a lot of recovery programs is like, hey, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict, whatever it is, like, and my life is unmanageable. And as a first principle of like to like assess where you are, don't waste time, be honest with the place that you're at. Like that has been a really good life reflection for me. And again, I don't think everybody should go into recovery. I hope that you don't have to do that. But for me, it's been a really powerful, again, example of exactly where am I and what are the steps I'm going to take to get to the goal that I'm at. And I can't go any faster than doing it right. And doing it right means on a daily basis, assessing where am I at? Where do I want to be? Where am I at? Can I circle back? And the goal should always be to go a little further. And again, like along with that, I mean, I do therapy. I do things that make me feel like I'm fucking cool. Like I like to exercise. I rollerblade, so I brought the '90s back. I aggressive inline in 2020, and I go to the skate park and I do cool jumps and tricks and grinds and stuff, and I like to put myself in an unbalanced situation and be balanced and feel cool. Like that's also important. Having lofty goals is also important, but being able to like come back to that truth point of, and again, this is where I talk about the spiritual aspect of sales. I'm not even talking about sales right now, but I am, because we all have these impossible goals. And as a rep, you come to it on a cycle. If you don't notice yourself on the cycle, try doing that. If you're on a quarter cycle, how do you always feel on January or on April 1st or on July 1st? If you're on, how do you always feel? Usually you feel like something when wherever you were before, you're at zero again. And you usually, I always felt a certain way about a month in. Oh, going a month in. How far am I to my? I'm a third in. Like that's how it always was, in months to me, and then weeks as you kind of progress to that last month. But those cycles, like how am I as I'm trying to reach this goal? Can I just come back to the basics of what kind of salesperson am I? Am I the kind of person to stop and reassess? And so like that's where, again, the ability to just say like, am I far enough? Am I doing well? Am I not? How do I feel about how I'm doing? Those things are so important because it's such a big part of who we are as we're trying to hit the number. How do I feel? Because boy, if you're in that death spiral of like, I'm terrible at my job, I'm never going to be good enough. And then at the same time, you're trying to show up to work and be like, I'm a normal person. It's so much work. So much effort goes into maintaining that facade, that performance, when emotionally you're not aligned. And so again, I'm talking a lot. I may have gone off the thread, but like from a healing journey standpoint, it's like, can you just be okay not being okay? Can you be okay when you don't know? Like when somebody comes in, like when you came in and you started, like when you came in to our organization and you taught us the 3 whys, it blew up our discovery process. And so many people were deeply uncomfortable with it. And a lot of people, there was all this, I mean, it's such a simple thing to do. And it's still there. It's still fields in Salesforce, why anything, why now, why us? And at the time, it blew up people's discovery process. It made everyone feel uncomfortable. When they tried it out, they didn't feel like they were good at it. And the reaction of most people in those circumstances is pretty predictable. They said, this thing doesn't work because I feel uncomfortable. And they didn't want to be like, well, there's probably some value in being uncomfortable. So just being able to say, like, I don't like this. I don't feel good. This brought out a side of me that I don't like. And you and I ended up working on it a lot. And I, at the time, was in the midst of doing a lot of that personal work of like, hey, I might be uncomfortable, but there's something at the end of this discomfort. And that, again, we ended up, I was already doing well. Then I started doing really, really well. And then the rest of the team got uncomfortable enough with the gap and started going, what's going on there? And then everybody picked it up. But those types of discomfort, like, again, nobody wants to change. Nobody wants to feel any worse than we already feel half the time. And I think though it's developing the ability to be uncomfortable openly, to look at the uncomfortable truths of what's going to stop an individual to get to their number, the team from getting to the company's goal, like and that's where I'm interested to hear you kind of again talk about like coaching founders from where they are to where they need to be because the board's yelling at them to get to these numbers, impossible as they may seem. So you got this impossible goal. How do you coach founders through that emotional journey of you need to stop and look at the things that are really in your way? Stop and look at where the time is really being wasted, because those people don't usually like to hear you're wasting time here. And it's because you've got this block. Like, and you talked about people's range of capacity to actually engage with those blocks or those challenges. Do you ever find yourself in the place going like, oh, I'm just not going to be able to get that person over that thing. Let's focus someplace else.
Well, that's a super good question. But before I go there, first of all, I love all your answers. I'm learning so much. And that's why I love what I do, because in high growth companies, it's always really smart people, really ambitious people, right? It's not by accident. And I learn just as much from you as I try to come in and coach you. You know, that was true when I worked with your company. It's true now as we're doing this podcast. So I hope you can tell from my smile. It's just amazing. And what you were just describing, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were saying like you were already blowing up, you were already overshooting everyone on the team. You're already, multiple times over quota. And I came in and I had this completely different approach. And instead of fighting it, you were like, let me try this. You got through the uncomfortableness. We did a few iterations together. And then you said you did even better. And so, and then their gap between you and the others was so great that their uncomfort got even more uncomfortable, and they couldn't hide from the fact that someone used it and it's working. And so that's what got them over the hump. And what I would say is that's when you went from being, on the leaderboard, the #1 sales rep, individual contributor. But in that process that we did together, you became the leader of others, right? And not just in like your results, but then building a bridge, with the toolkit that we created together and the skill set I taught you. And it went on for a couple of years, and I was gone after a couple quarters, double the average deal size, half the sales cycle. But then you continued on and became a leader in the team and a manager on the team. So how did you enroll the people? Then once you got the title, how did you enroll people to do the thing that you're asking me? How do I enroll? How do I work with founders?
Leave it to two salespeople to be like, that's a really good question. And let's keep going down the path I want. Okay, I'll play along. Tell me my questions are good. I think that, so look, nothing works better as a motivator, in my opinion, than success, and even more so, consistency. People respond to consistency. Because it's always easy. Look, sales is a game where there's always winners and losers. The leaderboard is real. If you don't have a sales organization that's like competition driven, it just probably there aren't like high growth startup kinds of people on the team. Like, people like to win. And it's really easy to chalk my wins up to I am the best, and to chalk your wins up to, oh, God, they got lucky. Really good inbounds. Oh, they got the good one. That kind of, people do that in a competitive, it's just a reality. So when you notice yourself doing that, just like the language thing I was talking about, like when you notice yourself saying those things, how'd you win that deal? Well, you know what the best part was when we got to this one part and I did this. Like, if you notice yourself doing that, you might be forgetting that luck is also involved in your process. And if you find yourself looking at someone who's winning all the time, going, they're always getting the lucky ones, you might be forgetting the fact that they have a process in place. And in fact, it's both those things at the same time. You have to be lucky because they picked up the phone. You could be outbounding. You'd be, I'm the best outbounder. You're lucky. They picked up the phone. You happened to call them at the right time. They picked up the phone. That was lucky. Now, do you have a process in place of how to manage that cold call? Same thing with any deal. Like, Do you have a process in place? And eventually, smart reps will always be looking at the person who's the most consistent, and they will get over the fear of they're probably just lucky, because that's a fear. That's saying, could they be better than me? And probably they aren't. And that's where it's like everybody's personalizing it. Like I'm not great. I put a process in place, and the process is pretty good. And it's an amalgamation of a lot of different sales tools and techniques that have been taught by people who, when I was watching them, I was, that person's good. You don't even have to like them to know that they're really good. And that's where, when, again, I was doing well at the time that you came in. And what you were asking us to do was very different than what we were doing and what we had been taught. And it also didn't mean that I threw everything out that I had learned and started doing what you said exclusively. I just added and amended. And I think that's where it is. It's an uncomfortable job anyway. So getting anyone to change is hard. Like, and by the way, salespeople, don't you already know that? Like, that's change is hard is one of my axioms in sales. That is, change is hard. Getting someone on the other end to be like, I'm going to drop this vendor and go with you. I've never met you before. I talked to like one ref. Sure, let me just put my career on the line because you're telling me some ROI rainbow story. Like, it is hard to convince people to do that. Why? Because change is hard for them. It is for us too. And you spend your day trying to convince people to change all day long. Trust me, you should change. And if you find that someone comes into the organization and says, hey, I have some suggestions for change for you. Well, we would never change. It's not going to work. How crazy. How crazy that you spend your whole day trying to convince people to change. And it's so hard for us to do it too. And so this is where I would say, just try it. Just try it out. The trial basis. Give it a shot on a couple deals. And guess what? Usually, how often is it when you implement your product that you're selling, does, the second they turn it on, ROI just shoots out of hoses? No, there's some iteration. You need customer success to come in and tweak it, dial it in. Of course, it doesn't work perfectly out the gate. You got to coach this stuff into existence. And so in the process I had with reps under me, when I'm trying to get them to change and adopt something different in their sales process, there is a degree to which sometimes you just have to say, hey, look, you have to trust me. And if you don't, one of my earlier sales mentors had a really great, I'm going to maybe butcher this, but he would say, hey, if you do it my way and it doesn't work, I get fired. But if you do it your way and it doesn't work, you get fired. I never led with quite that degree of like black or white. And that principle that he shared with me, it's so true. Just trust the people who are experienced and coming in to help you. Try it out. If it doesn't work, it's okay. Move on to the next one. Most of it's a numbers game. Like, and again, that part of that's that work hard, try hard. Like, just get into more deals. If you think you're going to ruin that perfect deal you have, like, guess what? Get into 10 more deals, and that one deal you're chasing down doesn't matter as much. And so that's where it's like, you've got to iterate, try out. And that's where, to your degree of, and you always talk about circling back, which I think is so important, whether it's in a discovery process and they gave you a really great why anything, don't just take it for granted. Bring it up in every meeting you're in with them. Be like, hey, you remember when you said that one thing about why it needs to change? Who else cares about that? And what? So it's not just you that, your boss cares about that. Why do they care? Because the CFO's on the COO, because, and so why? And so back to that one thing, circling back to the truth, to add more layers to it, as opposed to just saying like, they said they had an operational bottleneck and that's the answer. It's like, no, tell me more about that. Why back to that central piece of truth? And so that's circling back to, what is your process? How could it be better? How could you be more honest about what the real challenge is? I think, again, it's really about understanding the basics of what is in our way. How can we make it better? And not taking the answer for granted and coming back over and over, because over time, consistency will win out. People respond to consistent success. And so again, I never tried to do this to be like, oh, I'm the best, but I would say like, look, I never missed a quota. I was always at around 150%. I had some blowout quarters. I had some quarters where I just hit quota, but I never missed. And so if you want to do it your way, that's fine. But I promise that I'm not wrong about the way that I go about things. There are also, you show me your way. You might, as you pointed out, you might teach me something, and I am open to that. However, try this stuff. If you don't try it and try it like 10 times, you didn't really try.
Awesome. So good. And so how did you approach helping your team get over trying it? If there's anything in addition to what you just said. And then how did you hire for the ability to do this? Like, did they have to know how to do it already, or was it a quality that you knew that you could teach them? And did you make any mistakes along the way? Like, how about talk about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I would say for anybody who is a high performing individual contributor that takes the path that I took, which was to get into sales leadership because you killed it at the company you're at, I would say it's always a good path to try. And I did it for 2 years. I'm moving back into an IC position that has another route into leadership in a different industry. I like doing both, but being a leader is so much about hiring, and I did not grasp that coming into it. Because to your point about getting people over the hump, I know that people can change some fundamental things about the way they behave, for sure. I do not have experience that people change fundamentally. That's my experience. And again, to step out of the sales world for a minute, like I know this, being in the recovery world, you're watching people's lives change momentously all the time. If you're in active recovery, you've seen it for yourself. If you get through that phase where it's like everybody shows up with the wheels falling off in some fashion or another, and slowly you put the wheels back on because you follow the instructions that other people give you, like, hey, you're living your life this crazy way. You want to change and you can't. Most people show up because they want to stop and they can't. They want to change, but they can't. And these are all behaviors. It's behavior change. Just because I was able to change those behaviors does not mean I'm a different person. I have all the same fears and anxieties and passions and drives and capabilities and strengths and weaknesses that were there ahead of that behavior change. And so when it comes to applying that same principle, it's like, I'm not a different person. I just do different things. And by doing different things, I've actually changed a good degree. But foundation, I'm a pretty similar person. And one of the things that I noticed when I started my leadership journey, I thought that I could change, like I was given it to, and most of the times what'll happen is you get given the team with the most problems. They'll be like, you should do that.
Congratulations. You're such a winner. We're going to give you the losing team because make them like you.
Yes, exactly. And my advice, what I learned, and probably if you go through this, you'll have to learn it yourself too. You can't really change people. You can give them different tricks. Like these are all tricks. These are tricks to learn to use in a sales process that like will make you a better salesperson, hands down. And the fundamental qualities in a rep that I ended up starting to look for as I started hiring and got better at hiring. And I would say I hired a couple really great people who and it took me a while, but that I eventually was like, I am really proud of the people that I hired and left behind. And the two qualities that I would say, maybe let me make it three, but the two, like one is, they're going to work hard. It's people who work hard try more times. And this is where I do have a predisposition to working fast. Like I always want to go faster. It's more tries, because with more tries paired with the second quality of people who are curious. And then finally, I'd say like the third quality would be like people who are flexible. But that one matters a little less, because if you try hard, if you can outwork people, I would always say, like, any advice that I would give in sales is working hard is foundational. If you don't work hard, you don't get to try as many times. And the ability to fail and fail fast, like, this is some startup 101 shit. Like, you've got to be able to fail and fail fast so you can reiterate and go back to that foundational what's in the way thing. And so that would be the first quality. Like, you've got to be able to, it's like people who need to cold call and they do 20 calls a day. It's like, do 50. And it'll suck. The first time you do 50 calls and you get 50 no's, you're like, wow, that sucks a lot worse than getting 20 no's. Sure does. But if it's going to take you 200 calls to get to the first yes, one person does it in 4 days and one person does it in 10. So be the person that does it in 4, because if it's going to take you 200 calls, doing 20 a day, like, it's just going to take you longer. And then that's where being curious fits in. And resilient too, I guess I would say in there, because it's like, you've got to be curious enough to go, like, what's not working, and have the ability to go back. And that's where the flexibility, and I guess you could also say, like, the emotional resilience to be able to, in the face of the frustration, and I would say oftentimes the shame that comes with, I'm not doing good enough. And trust me, I would also say, like, this is where I notice, as I'm describing this, like, in my, or there's this little voice behind me that's going, like, that's you too right now. Because I'm in this new industry, like, I'm experiencing all this shame and frustration, and, like, I'm not good enough ism that, like, pops into my head when I'm not far enough along. But I will tell you, what I'm doing now is what I would hire in the best reps that I had, which is the ability to try hard enough to just keep running into the problem that's happening, and the curiosity to say, what's not working, and to have the emotional resilience to stand up in the face of what's not working is probably something I'm doing because I can see other people succeeding and they don't have something I don't have. It's not about how smart they are, or, I mean, they might have more industry knowledge on it, but that's not something unattainable. And so to be able to look ahead and then start asking, because that's what happens. Like, you try it enough times and you fail. You get curious about why it's not working. Then you have to admit, I might not be the one with the answers. Now, again, every squirrel finds a nut. You make 200 calls, like, someone will say yes. But if you want to make 200, the next 200 calls, get 5 people to say yes, and the next 200 calls to get 10 people to say yes. And then in those, now we have 16 deals on the plate, or 16 meetings. You get those 16 meetings. How many people do you get through the set? That, again, you have to be able to constantly get more at-bats, be curious about what works and what doesn't, and probably ask the people who are ahead of you in the game how they're doing it better than you, because you fundamentally can't have all the answers. And that's one of the other problems about hiring experienced sales reps that I have found. You hire these really well-honed, sharpened tools, but they're brittle. Like, they'll break under a new process, and to be able to reform the metal that you're made of to fit into the new industry that you're in. You know, I'm 37. I'm already finding, I'm like, ooh, this new industry, it's a little different than I'm used to. And I'm just having to be flexible. Like, I know I won't break, but oh boy, it's hard to get pounded by the reality that, like, what I was really good at, how I could constantly produce in the last role, won't be the same here. And so for all new reps going into it, like, again, you just have to have a lot of iterations, work harder, get more at bats, and then when it's not working, which it shouldn't at the start, be curious as to why, and do the 3 whys on yourself. Oh my God, I don't know if I would tell my reps to do that to themselves all the time. And then ask the people who know more than you do. Ask for advice. Ask to be reworked and reshaped into a more effective tool.
I love it. So it's like iterating on the unknown, the known unknowns within oneself, you know, to entrust in that process. That's grounded in, you know, working hard, keep iterating in a curious way, seeing things as they are, and that you'll find it because there is people who are successful, right? That's what I tell founders. It's like, I don't try to convince them of the process. I'm like, let's do the process. Let's go to your most important deals that your board will be pissed off if you don't close, or it will not make you get to where you need to get to. And it's like, we do an iteration on them. And it's like, what percent do you think you're at? And this is what I was going to say earlier. What percent do you think you're at? Everyone's at 80%. And when you look at it objectively through a reality lens, why anything, why yes, why now? And then the 5 WNs, why not just do nothing? Why not, change is hard, right? Why not just stay the same? Oh, lose revenue? Well, why not just have the same amount of revenue that you have right now? Like, what happens if you don't change? How much of a change would it have to be in revenue before it would be, you'd have to do something? Why is that? Because of this. Well, why not just, and when you do that, all of a sudden you realize it's not at 80%. Oftentimes it's not even at 20%, which is you have answers for the organization's 3 Ws, and they're deep, wide, and high enough at the 5 WNs, which I just kind of quickly showed. But it's at 10%. And oftentimes it's like this 80% deal, it's $1 million deal, but they've gone dark. So it's not even at 10%. And it's like you hear all these excuses. And the key for me, the quality of like the founders that I want to work with is that when they see the 80% go down to 10%, sometimes 1%, which is a suspect, you suspect they need you, but the reality is they're not coming back to you. So maybe you're wrong. That's why it's a suspect. That they actually go, oh, I didn't see it this way. I thought we were much further. And now that I see that we don't have answers, it doesn't mean there isn't a good answer, but we don't know. It's a known unknown if this is true, right? Like these were our assumptions. This was our pitch. And given that, and given like the steps for the process, they know, okay, what's the next thing I have to do to get back to a 10% where they're talking to us? And then to confirm as 20%. And it gives them like, working harder, but like instead of doing a bunch of stuff, it's like, no, here's the specific thing that you need to do to go from 1% to 10%, 10% to 20. They find comfort. The kind of founders that I work with, right, who are willing to iterate and see things as they are, they'll then find comfort in that. And when you go through 3 deals and they all go from 80 to 10 or less, and then you tell them, like, okay, well, let's look at that. Based on that, what should you do as a next step? Usually they know. I don't have to tell them, but I've held reality clearly to them, the uncomfortableness of it. And they take that next step. And then all of a sudden, either it's like, oh, yeah, we aren't aligned. Now the unknowns are known and it's bad. More times than not, though, there are good ones. And then it's like that iteration was like, I believe in this. I believe that it was where you said it was. I believe that when you know where to set it as, you know where to go next. And I believe if we're not aligned, we're wasting time. Each time you do that, so that's how founders get into this work. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and again, this is where my question is often around like, what's the emotional quotient of getting someone to go back? That is, I think it's just one of those fundamental things where we don't want to think we have to go back. We want to think we've gotten as far as we are, and like I'm good at this thing now. And reminding people that it is not a loss. It's actually a gain, but it's going to feel like a loss to go from 80 to 20 or to 10.
To be a successful founder, successful leader, successful rep, my mentor says you need brains, guts, and drive. Right. And when they've tried so many times their way, and now an 80% deal they've talked to the board about goes dark, there's enough greed and fear that will allow them to go back. Right. They're taking the meeting with me and they agree to like look at their deals through this lens. There's enough greed and fear that allows them to go back. And then how they respond to that, do they react, or you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know our industry, you don't know this, which I think like working with your team, someone said that you don't know health tech, you don't know this, and it's like, this is a mirror. I'm showing you what you know about your deals. Whatever you say is more about you than me. It's like I'm rubber, you're glue. It's exactly like that. And it was interesting that I used to have to like emotionally not get confrontational. Like I had to learn how to hold this space and then like, hey, there's an opportunity to see things differently, maybe more clearly, and then to have clearer action about it, right? Are you open to the possibility of that? Are you open to the possibility that you're missing something? And now that I am more secure in my approach to doing this, It's the greed and fear that initially gets people to hit rock bottom to then change. And then when they see that and they iterate, they see their best self now. The ones that end up working with me, the ones that end up, doubling sales, having sales cycles, little plug, they're the ones that something was ignited there. And if they didn't have it before, chances are it's not going to happen, but I've seen it. Some people, it ignites. And if they trust the process, it's a painful engagement sometimes if they didn't have it before, because they got to keep coming back and relearning. But if they trust the process and they keep coming back, they will figure it out. And so that's brains, guts, and drive. Yeah. So what's your thoughts on that?
It's killer, man. I mean, this is where I've often coached from the perspective, and I try to do this with myself, which is the sales process that we're trying to put our prospects and our customers through, we should also do to ourselves. And this is where I was saying, it's like you spend all your day trying to convince someone else to change, but can you do that on yourself? And the start of most sales engagements is, hey, do you have this problem? And most people go, no, I don't have a problem. And you have to go like, oh, let me try to convince you that you've got a problem. And this is one of those things, whether it's in professional or personal work, when someone holds the mirror up and says, hey, this is actually about you, most people jump to this place of, you must have a personal something to gain for holding this mirror up to me. You must be doing it for a reason. You must be doing it to hurt me. And most people get defensive about that. And that's where, when you talk about the objectivity and the skill and there's a performance to it. And I heard you talking about, like, I had to work on it. Okay, I know we're coming up on time, but I'm curious to hear you talk about, because I think this is helpful for reps to understand, as well as leaders and founders, I'm sure, as well. Like, there's work that it takes to be able to hold up the mirror. There's a performance of holding up the mirror in a way that it should threaten people. It should scare people a little, to be like, you think you're here and you're not. You think it works, but it doesn't. And we have a breakthrough to share with you. Like, that's what we're all doing in our sales pitches. You think you're here, you know it hurts a little bit, but underneath that scab is a deep, festering problem. And ooh, I've got this breakthrough miracle cure that's gonna fix it. But you got to take a meeting with me. You got to come to the doctor, and then we're going to talk about how to fix this thing. And most people don't want to go to the doctor. Most people don't want to investigate the problem. They want to go as long as they can without dealing with it. And that's where I would ask you, like, how do you, with founders, and then with their reps, if they let you in to say, okay, I do want you to work with my team, you've got to hold that mirror up. And you talked about the process of getting better at being objective and saying, like, look, this mirror is for you. If you want it, take it. If you don't, not take the next meeting. What were the challenges you came up with to, like, remove yourself? And I promise I'm gonna give you the floor in 2 seconds, because clarifying, like, I've watched reps who, when their deals fall apart, they're like, these fucking idiots, they just didn't understand. Whatever, screw up. It's like they're personally involved in the fact that someone said, I don't want your product. And that, I always was like, what? And I also understand, I've gotten upset when people tell me no too. Like, I'm not saying that I'm some paragon, but like, it takes work. And I'm curious to hear you talk about what work did you have to do? What problems, what did make you feel personal when you held the mirror up and somebody tried to shatter it? Like, how did you get to where you are now? Because you're so effective with it.
That's a great question. Very lovely way to put it. Thank you. My heart was like, oh. To realize that my whole framework that is based on Steve Brown's framework that he developed, going from being an engineer to solution engineer to sales rep. When you really look at the first principles and, like, what's below it, I always think, for why buy anything, why buy us, why buy now? It's compassion. It's all oriented towards the suffering of the prospect, right? As well as your suffering as a sales rep. If you're trying to sell something that's not aligned, it just sucks, right? So you're like, okay, I'm going to be compassionate to them, solving their problems, and compassionate to myself. If they don't have problems, I'm going to be honest about it. So it's like when I'm coaching, am I really looking at, am I cultivating, do I feel in my body compassion? And increasingly, I can feel it in my body, right? The second one is like curiosity. That's the next quality that I'm developing, the imprint in me, not just my brain being curious because it's so curious, but like my body. And that's kind of like the WNs, the why not just, so if someone's like, this doesn't work, I'm like, okay, cool. Why not just do it exactly the way you're doing it? What's going to happen? And I actually am curious, like maybe there's something they're doing that's working. And then I can show how my system helps you do that more consistently, or I'm like, okay, well, my system does that. But like, if something's working in that area, well, let's move this. What's not working? So it's constantly this, like, not just I want to end your suffering and my suffering, but it's like, are we aligned? I don't even know. So let me ask the why not questions. And I can feel it in my body when I'm being truly curious, not trying to prove a point. Like, gotcha. It's not a trick. It's actually like curiosity. That's why I learn more from the people I coach than I know that I coach them, right? Because I'm one person, one system. I am learning about all kinds of different people, different industries, different products, different companies. And so I feel it in my body when I'm being curious, right? There's a part of me that loves it. And then the last one, and this is the key, we haven't touched on this, I don't think. You said a bunch of C words that were amazing. This is one that you didn't say. Collaboration. Is the coaching collaborative? Are they showing up? Is there a willingness? Are they open? Are they engaged? And what I found was when confronted with change, something new, people close. And if they're closed, none of this is going to work. And so what I've learned is I am compassionate, curious, and if they're closed, I'm like, I'm feeling like you're closed, or, hey, I'm wondering, are you open to something new? I just heard what you said. I see that that's working, that's not working. You don't think it's going to work. Are you open to trying it? And what I found is really respecting the other and making sure it's collaborative. And if it's not collaborative, get curious why it's not collaborative, and getting compassionate how you bring it to them. That will then like disarm most people to give it a shot, or it's not going to work. And I actually will stop working with people that aren't open to something new and focus more on people like you who were, and then know that once your results are there, they're going to get pretty curious, and they have a second shot at it. And then the third thing is the people that aren't open to new stuff, usually within a quarter, maybe a year, they get fired. I don't ever say anything negative about anyone. Their results do. And so I'm literally sitting here going, this could change your life. And inside my compassion is I know that if they aren't open, that this might be the end of their employment at some point. So how can I cultivate that compassion to really want to give the gift and see if they collaboratively will receive it?
That's good sales and business advice, but it's also good, again, like this is where I'm talking about, like this is our one short life, and if the work we're doing isn't aligned with who we want to be, what a waste of time. First principle, like what a waste of time if the work that I'm doing at work isn't the work I need to be doing in life. And what you're talking about is like, I want to be doing that with my wife and with my daughter and with my parents, all of whom I would say are people with whom I get misaligned sometimes. And my objectives and their objectives might not be, but we're all trying to work towards the same, more production, better unity, like better harmony. And if I can take that perspective into the business world, and especially to like my own personal performance, it's such a gift to be able to get and to share. And that's where I love you adding that last C of collaboration, because that could also be one of the meters, as are all these other things. Am I aligned towards that? Like, is that, that could sort of be the last guiding light, the big star in the sky to follow.
Awesome. It's been so much fun. rapping with you about all this. I've always been just amazed at your abilities, both as a person and professionally. I've learned so much from you. Any final thought you want to leave the audience with?
No, man, just more high fives for you and me. You're really great. I'm really great. We're all really good.
We're
No,
aligned.
I just say, like, you know, the work that I got to do with you is foundational for me. Like when you talk about like doubling and cutting in half, like those are things that, like, again, plug for Walter, like absolutely things that happen for me. I won't promise that every person will get that, but I promise that if you try, you will get something out of it. And that is really possible. But I think with all of these growth things, it's not because it's guaranteed. As much as salespeople, we'd like to say, like, guaranteed you're going to get this ROI. I would always try to go to people with ROI and say, like, I'm going to present this story. I'm going to tell this great story of the things you can get. And if even if you only believe half of what I'm saying is right or less, like, is that worth it? Is progress worth it? Because you'd have to trust me that I can do something for you. So know that everything that we say about ourselves, about our process, if even half of it is true, we can get a little bit further on. That's where that, you know, as you kept talking about, like, come back, reiterate. Those are such good practices in life. And again, if you can apply them from our sales processes to our leadership processes to the processes of company growth, if I can just get a little bit better, it's good magic, man.
Thanks, Kevin.
Appreciate you, brother.